And that's the thing about podcast guesting is it's a muscle. It's a muscle. The first couple times you do it, I don't care if you're an introvert or an extrovert, you are going to sweat and stumble your way through it for the most part. Okay. We all do that. I've been on almost 100 podcasts. In fact, it may be even over 100 at this point. But if you were to listen to my first, I'm sure 5, 10, whatever, they sound very different than I do now. And so I think that that's an important point to make is like, you will get better over time. It will get easier over time. That doesn't mean you're not prepping. That doesn't mean you're not putting the same amount of work into it, but it does just mean that you feel a bit more comfortable if a question does get thrown at you that maybe you weren't necessarily prepared for, but you've done this before now.
Hello, and welcome to episode 222 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts, along with strategies for success. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we will air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform, leave a review or rating. That would mean a lot to me, and help others find the show. Tell a friend about the podcast. Help get the word out there that introversion is a beautiful thing. Christina Lenkowski is a forward-thinking podcast publicist and educator for business owners, speakers, and authors looking to expand their credibility and go from best-kept secret to go-to expert in their industries through being a guest on other people's podcasts. In 2019, after 13 years working in the PR realm, Christina discovered what being a guest on podcasts did for her online-based business. Since then, she's dedicated her work to helping other business owners, particularly women, see the same kind of results. She's been a guest on almost 100 podcasts. All right. Well, welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, Christina. Christina, it's so good to have you on today.
Thank you, David. I'm so excited. We were talking a bunch before this and just kind of playing off some of the differences that we see between extroverts and introverts and kind of the publicity space. And so I'm really excited to dive into this today because there is absolutely room for all types of people to be successful once they know how to kind of manage that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are an extrovert. We do let a few extroverts on the show.
I am. I know. I feel really privileged that I get to be
Yeah.
one of the few extroverts you have on here, but I loves the people. I love them. I want to be around all the people. That's where I get all my energy from. And so I am just kind of that Enneagram 7 full-blown extrovert there.
Yeah. And the other thing is we need everybody. And
100%.
but in our conversation just now, you have a great understanding of the differences and you appreciate the differences. We
Yes.
we all bring different strengths. And we're going to get into that today,
Yes.
especially when it comes to using podcasting in marketing and things like
hmm
that. So let's start. Just tell us a little bit more about you and your journey and why you do what you do now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been in the PR and marketing world for a little over 20 years now, which makes me feel really old, but that is the way that it is. And I always grew up that I was going to be a journalist, thought I was going to be in that world. And I remember my mom, who was the director of a large nonprofit in my home state of Oregon, was like, I think you're going to be in PR. And I was like, no way. You don't even know me. You don't even get me. You know what I mean? I was like so sure that I was going to do this thing. And then I went on to edit the paper at my university and I realized that it actually wasn't what I wanted to necessarily do. And people are always like, oh, that's such a bummer. You got your degree in this. And then it wasn't necessarily what you wanted. But I was like, but that was actually the greatest thing of all was I learned really young that that wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but I still wanted to be able to write. And so after college, after traveling for a year, I was offered a couple jobs, and one was in a PR department and one was in a newspaper. And I decided to go the PR route, and I've never really looked back. It's been a good blend for me of writing and still being able to be creative, but then also the social aspect that I really enjoy about that. And about 5 or so years ago, I started this agency that I have now. So right in 2020, kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, if you will. And I narrowed down into podcasts specifically. So that is the only type of publicity work that we do at our agency, because I really do believe that it is the best way to build trust and authority with the audiences that want to hear from you.
Awesome. So that leads to my next question. I liked that, on your website, it says you help people through podcasting go from the best kept secret to go-to expert. How do you
Yes.
how do you do that?
That's such a great question. And the reason why I love to point that out is there are a lot of people out there, I'm sure people that are listening to this, who are really friggin' good at what they do. They are one of the best at what they do, but nobody knows it, right? Outside of them and maybe some of their clients and maybe a couple other people. And I have a lot of people that come to me that have built their business based on referrals, right? So they're like, I just put my head down. I'm really, really good at what I do. And that's what's built my business to where it is today. But they come to me at a certain point because they are not getting new leads into their business. They're not getting new business. All those kind of referrals have not necessarily dried up, but they're just may not be coming in at the pace that maybe they were at a certain point. And so they're realizing that they need to be out there more. I think this is one of the biggest mistakes that entrepreneurs make is they kind of have that field of dreams mentality of if you build it, they will come. But in actuality, you need to also be putting yourself out into situations where you're getting in front of new audiences regularly.
Yeah. And how does podcasting help with that?
The thing about podcasting that is so wonderful and the thing that I really love about it is you are leveraging someone else's audience, right? So I am getting out in front of someone else's audience. I am talking to them about something that hopefully is going to bring a lot of value to them, make them look at something a little differently, etc. And in exchange, like in exchange here, David is getting me in front of his regular listeners, the people that really respect and care about what he's saying day in and day out. And so this is a really important thing to note is like 70% of listeners of podcasts feel like they have a real connection with the hosts and the guests that they hear on that podcast. And I will say that for me personally, there are a couple of podcast hosts where I'm like, I know them. Like, I feel like I really know them, even though I don't know them. If I was to come up to them somewhere, they wouldn't know me from Eve. But it is absolutely where I feel like I have that personal connection to them. And so, podcasting, I mean, really, there's no better way to have people feel that type of connection with you. You're going to be in their head, in their ears for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever. And love you or hate you, they're going to have a feeling about you one way or the other at the end of that.
Yeah. And then is the approach to podcast guesting, is it different for introverts than extroverts, do you think?
I would love to hear your opinion on this, David, but I will definitely give some thoughts on like how I prepare and kind of the things that I say. There are a lot of people that I speak at events or someone hears me on a podcast and they're like, I love what you do, but I'm an introvert, right? I could never see myself going out there on being on podcasts. And I always like to shift that mentality because most of my clients are introverts. And the fact of the matter is, when you do a podcast recording like what David and I are doing right now, it's just the two of us. There's no big, I mean, my dog's barking, but there's no big crowd of people or anything like that that's listening in to us. There's no expectation on that. If I mess something up, and David was kind enough to say this before we hit record, I can edit if something goes awry, right? So the pressure is really down. I'm having a one-on-one conversation. I'm able to be really authentic. And that's why it works so well for introverts. They really can feel comfortable and in their best space because they're doing what they do best, which is having a conversation. It's not that introverts, and you know this, don't like to connect with people, right? Or talk with people. It's just that maybe it looks a little different. When it comes to the prep, what I was saying beforehand, and David, I know you can chime in on this, is like, he sent over this beautiful list of questions, beforehand of like, hey, here's some of the stuff that I'm going to ask you. Me personally, and my extroverted self, and I think how a lot of extroverts are, I don't want to look at the questions. I want to have him ask me them and me be able to give my, real response in the moment. To me, that's what feels authentic. But David, why don't you talk? Like, I would love for you to tell people a little bit about how you feel about that and kind of the example you even gave earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I am absolutely an introvert, and I love this conversation that we're having. I love podcasting. I don't get nervous anymore. I used to.
Love
I didn't,
that.
but what it was understanding that I'm a deep thinker.
Hmm.
I often need to think before I speak. It's just, and it's not a choice. It's just
Oh,
that's how I'm
yeah,
wired,
exactly.
you know, where often, and I use these words, I say things like often or generally. Often you probably are going to think out loud, that's how you help
100%.
form your ideas. And it's just a difference, and it's not
Yep.
something that we choose. So with the preparation, and I have a lot of experience with this, as I was telling you, I get all kinds of responses. I do send questions, and it's not a
Yep.
script, like I'm not looking at everything I'm
No, no,
asking,
no, no.
but it's a
Yeah,
framework. It's like, hey,
exactly.
here's, and I do my preparation. That's really important, and we
Hmm.
all do. You're going to prep in your way, and everybody's going to do some preparation. But I am going to say, here's what I would like to talk about. Please let me know if we're going in a direction you don't want to go, or
Hmm.
if there's something else that I'm not aware of that you want me to be aware of. So that's why I do that.
Hmm.
But it's up to the guest how they prepare. Now,
Hmm.
maybe someone doesn't send you questions and you're an introvert. You can ask for them, or you could also just do a lot of you could listen to a lot of their shows. You could do a lot of other things to help
Yep.
prepare you for that episode. But
They're
that's
kind
that's
of,
the yeah, go
yeah.
ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, absolutely, there are different ways to be prepared. So, like the questions, like you said, sometimes hosts send them, sometimes they don't. It totally does depend. To your point, you can ask them. Some hosts are going to say no, they're not going to send stuff beforehand, but other ones are definitely going to be open to doing that. But like you said, that's actually how I prepare for any podcast episode is I always listen to an episode of that podcast within 48 hours of when I'm going to do my episode recording. So I want it to be really fresh in my mind. I listened to at least one. I was saying to David, like right before we hopped on, I was like, hey, I was listening to your episode this morning with Sal about public speaking. I really loved it. You guys got into Clifton strengths. Like, we kind of talked about that a little bit. So there are all kinds of different ways to prepare. There's also the knowledge that you will generally know the topic that you're going to be talking about, right? So you can really take a look at that topic. I again always do this and I take a look and I think about a couple things, a couple points that I might want to make around that topic on this particular podcast. And if I make them, great. But also if I don't, that's okay too. But I know that I went into that episode prepared as much as possible. Again, even if I didn't have those questions ready for me. And one thing David said that I think is so important for every single person to hear is he's done it enough now. He's not nervous about it. And that's the thing about podcast guesting is it's a muscle. It's a muscle. The first couple times you do it, I don't care if you're an introvert or an extrovert, you are going to sweat and stumble your way through it for the most part. Okay. We all do that. I've been on almost 100 podcasts. In fact, it may be even over 100 at this point. But if you were to listen to my first, I'm sure 5, 10, whatever, they sound very different than I do now. And so I think that that's an important point to make is like you will get better over time. It will get easier over time. That doesn't mean you're not prepping. That doesn't mean you're not putting the same amount of work into it, but it does just mean that you feel a bit more comfortable if a question does get thrown at you that maybe you weren't necessarily prepared for, but you've done this before now.
Yeah, yeah. So I I'd like to think I started off great when I started this. I'm over 4 years now. But
Love
I
it.
know I know what you're saying is true. I know I'm absolutely better than I was 4 years ago.
We all are. Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
just the natural progression. Yeah.
And I remember the first podcast I was on, it was before I started this,
Yeah.
and they gave me a couple questions that I just had really never thought of before, and I was kind of thrown by them.
Yeah.
But now, if the same thing happened, I wouldn't be thrown. I would just, I'd have a great response because I'm just so practiced now,
Yeah.
and that's what you just got to start and do your best.
Yep.
And this applies to me, podcasting or public speaking. I've really told myself, as far as like perfectionism goes, because that gets in a lot of our way,
Hmm.
is that guess what? You're not perfect. You're going to do your best preparation, but guess what? Nobody that's listening is perfect either.
Nope. Nope. And they're honestly not thinking about how you're not perfect too. Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like I have literally never been listening to a podcast guest and been like, they are not being perfect right now. You know what I mean? And if anything, I feel the opposite. Like I love when someone accidentally swears or there's, something that doesn't quite go the way maybe they thought it was going to go. And it really it makes you realize like, oh, this is a real human, right? This isn't just a polished machine. This is someone going through it. And I do those things all the time and sometimes they get edited out. I mean, I don't mind if things stay in there because this is real life, right? I mean, I have had moments when like my daughter walks in the middle of an interview, something like that, where I'm like, maybe we could take that out. But, for the most part, this is real life and this is what it's like. And that's what people actually really relate to.
Yeah. And as I think you said, a myth that we regularly bust on this show is that introverts don't like people. That's
Oh,
ridiculous.
absolutely.
Everybody,
Yeah,
everybody likes people. We just may want to connect differently.
exactly.
And I have found for myself, this has been such a great way to network. How is
Oh, yeah.
podcasting a great way to build relationships?
I mean, I think that there's so many different ways that I can look at it, but one of the biggest ones is your relationship with the host. So a lot of people sleep on that, in my opinion. This is something that I really harp on my clients with, and I actually will get on them a little bit about it because where I see like some of the biggest opportunity in podcast guesting is not necessarily when the podcast airs. That is one part of it. Don't get me wrong. I kind of think there's three parts to podcast guesting. And one of those benefits, or three benefits, I should say, to it. And one of those big benefits is, of course, the podcast airs, you get in front of new people, right? But another big one is that you are having a real, genuine conversation with a host, right? And that host relationship has brought so many opportunities my way, and quite frankly, so much money my way that I always want people to know like, this is something to not sleep on, right? This is something to be prepared for because you have now had a real, authentic conversation with someone. You guys have really gotten in, you've had questions asked, you've been able to give opinions. So that my point of that being, this isn't just like, you're meeting each other at a networking event, just shaking hands and saying what you do, right? You guys are really getting into it on something that you both care about, right? Something that you both kind of naturally gravitate towards. And then the third thing that I always say is a big benefit of podcast guesting is the content that comes out of it. As business owners, we are kind of always in that like content struggle, you know what I mean? Always kind of like, all right, I need to have new stuff, I need to be doing this or that, etc. And being a guest on podcasts is one of, I mean, it's like standing at the top of, instead of like pushing something up a mountain, it's like standing at the top of a mountain and just like letting us, like let's say it's a snowball, letting it roll down, right? From every podcast episode, you can be creating all kinds of different content for your business. So there's multiple ways that being on a podcast guest benefits you. But networking wise, I really, really believe that host relationship is kind of the number one thing that you can see from being a guest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have found that myself. So, how do you recommend that people even find the right podcast to be on?
Great question. There's a couple different ways that we really do our research. One is, and here's something that all of you can be doing, like literally I'm going to challenge you to do this in the next 48 hours after this episode. Ask your audience what podcasts they listen to. Okay? I think this is just a really great low hanging fruit way to find out what people are listening to, right? Now, sometimes they're going to send you podcasts that make no sense, right? Like my client, people know that I really love true crime. Okay. So, like, I get sent a lot of true crime podcasts when I ask this, but like, if I'm suddenly pitching clients to a true crime podcast, things have gone horribly awry. Okay. So, like, that's not necessarily what makes sense in that way, but I will always get ideas on shows that I've never heard of before, right? Or someone may even send their own show in that, right? And it might be something that I haven't seen before. So that's a really good place to start. But other than that, go into Apple Podcasts and just put in a keyword, right? Or put in something. They also have search by categories. You can just go and start looking that way. I also like to, one thing that I really teach when I'm teaching on how to find shows is think about someone that has a similar audience to you. Okay. So a similar audience to you. They could be a competitor or it could be someone that's more just like you have complementary services, right? But you have the same audience. Drop their name into Spotify, drop their name into Apple Podcasts, see what shows they've been on. That's a really good place for you to start searching for shows because you can also scroll down to the you might also like or the people that listen to this listen to and find some shows that are going to be the right fit. The key to all this and what I'm saying though is get in front of people that are looking to hire you. Get in front of people that are looking to spend money with you. I think people get way too caught up in wanting to be with their peers or being on shows that's just full of their peers. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but I'm saying if you're doing this to make money, which is how we're usually using podcasts, then you need to be getting in front of your ideal clients.
Yeah. And so then how do people pitch to be on a show? What are some good things to do? Maybe what are some things not to do?
I can definitely give some thoughts, but I bet, David, you're going to have some insight into this too, as someone that receives a lot of pitches. But really, I think what it comes down to is research. People, when they hear what I do, they're like, it's almost like a winemaker. Like people are like, oh, that sounds so awesome, whatever. And I'm like, I mean, honestly, I'm just like researching most of the day. You know what I mean? Because that's really what it is. And listening to podcasts and, sending our pitches. But the difference between getting a yes and getting a no a lot of times comes down to making sure you have the topics that make sense for their audience. It's stuff that they haven't really talked about before. And then also, like I said, personalizing it, making it so that that host actually knows that you have been paying attention to the show, that you understand who their audience is and you can bring value to that audience. A lot of people do, and David, I know you can attest to this, they do what we call the spray and pray method to pitching, which is they just write a pitch and it probably isn't even that good of a pitch. They find a list of hosts and they just send it out to a bunch and kind of cross their fingers. And that is not the way that we pitch here or at my agency. But also, that's just not, it's not going to get you on usually the quality of shows that you're wanting to be getting on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I get many pitches, and I'll tell you what, if they have don't even mention the show and what's it about, it makes it
Yeah.
really difficult.
Yeah.
Even the ones that are good, yeah, I appreciate the topics,
Mm-hmm.
or a little flattery goes a long way. Like I heard this
100%.
episode, you
Yep.
know, and it's just really expressing why. Because if I don't get that, then it is going to be a lot of work to kind of vet and see, is this someone I want to have?
Mm-hmm.
So save that person the work. Tell them what you want to talk about, and why they want to be on your show. Will go a long way, and you'll get a lot more yeses that way.
I love that you just said that, David. Like, I can't even tell you how much I love that you just said that because that is so true. And it goes back to those journalism day. My journalism day is at Oregon State University of make it as easy to get to the yes as possible. And that is our philosophy here as well. It's like you as the guest need to be doing the heavy lifting. Sometimes there's a mindset shift that has to happen where people are like, well, they'd be lucky to have me on their show. No. Okay, like no. I want to put it this way. A podcast host, and for any of you that have your own podcast, you know this, having a podcast is a lot of work. There is a lot of work that goes into putting on a podcast weekly, even if you're doing it bi-weekly, I don't care. A lot of stuff that's going into that, editing, promoting it, getting out on the channels, etc. You as a guest, you have the easy part. Okay? That doesn't mean that again, you're not prepping. That doesn't mean you're just showing up without any thoughts. But what I am saying is you show up, you drop your knowledge, and then of course, I want you to be promoting it when it goes live, and the host also wants you to be promoting it when it goes live, but they are really doing the bulk of the work there. So you need to be making it as easy as possible on your end so that they can show up, have a great interview, take all the information that you've given them and make it as easy on their end as possible. So that's why I really love that you said that because I think sometimes people think that they are making it easier for a host if they have like a really broad topic, right? Like if they're like, "Hey, I would love to come and I can talk about marketing, branding, sales," right? And they just kind of bullet out a couple things that they're an expert in. But at that point, the host would then have to figure out what exact topics you guys are talking about. If you come with those exact topics, which by the way, they can give opinion on, you can shift them, right? But you're giving those ideas there. It's again going to make that host much more likely to give you a yes.
Yeah, yeah. And just one more personal example. So this show, a lot of, we talk about the strengths and needs of introverts. We bust myths. We talk about strategies for success. So what I have to be really careful on, and we don't always talk about introversion, extroversion. Sometimes people have a great way, strategy for success, and it
Yeah.
can apply to everybody. But what I don't want is I don't want someone to come on that has a misunderstanding of introversion and is
Hmm.
spreading those myths I'm working so hard to bust. So,
Hmm.
the more you can show how you align with their show, the better.
Exactly. For someone pitching you, that's something they're going to need to make very clear, right? Is like, hey, I understand that this show is geared toward introverts. Either I myself are an introvert or I work with a lot of introverts, and here's what I've learned. You know what I mean? Over time, if someone doesn't even bring up the word introvert when they're pitching your show, that's going to be an immediate red flag for you of like, they don't actually know what this show is about, right? Or we hear from hosts sometimes, like maybe it's like literally a like women in business, show, and they'll be like people pitching men to them all the time, you know what I mean? And not even really mentioning anything about that. And so, that's exactly what David's saying is so true is like just make sure you are acknowledging like, hey, I know who your audience is. And here's why I think that would make sense for me to come and be on your show.
Yeah. We've talked a little bit about this, but maybe let's expand a little bit more. Someone that is thinking, that's listening, that, hey, you know what, I really should be on podcasts. I have something to
Good.
share, but I'm nervous. I don't think I can do it.
Yes.
I'm anxious.
Yeah.
What's your techniques for that?
First of all, everyone, like, I think that is a very common, no matter what, feeling when you're first getting started. Like we spoke about, when you're first getting started, it's going to be a little more, you're going to be a little more anxious and stressed about it than, when you get a little bit further down the road. But the ways that I would say to kind of best think about that is always go into it with a mindset of service over self-promotion, right? I am not going on shows to just talk about how great I am, right? No one wants to listen into a show for 30 minutes. And I've heard shows like that. It is not fun when you just have someone come on and they're just talking about themselves the whole time, not really giving a lot of value, etc. You are going in there to provide that value. And at the end, of course, you're going to talk a little bit about, where people can find out more from you, if it, makes sense to talk about what service you offer, etc. But really, you're getting into that value positioning there. So I think that mindset's really, really important. The other thing is prepare. Listen to a couple episodes of the show before you hop on to do the recording. And then, just like you said, get started and know that, like, the first couple, like we talked about, they're not going to be your favorite, that maybe you're ever on, but they are necessary to get going. I'm looking at it right now, right in front of me at my desk at home. I have a keychain and it says, don't be afraid to suck at something new. Okay. And so I really, really think that that is such a great like mindset to have when you're feeling anxious is like, I just got to do it. And you know what? For all of y'all that started your own businesses, you did that. You've already done that. Right. And if you're a parent like I am, that was sucking at something new also when that came out, when my child came
Yeah.
out, etc. All kinds of different things because I just didn't know what to do. But then that muscle kicked in and obviously we're 10 years in now, so it obviously looks a little different, but I just mean if we didn't have the courage to be doing those things, we would never get started with anything new in our life, right? So just kind of know that we got to get through that bumpy period and then it's going to feel a lot better.
Yeah. And I just tell people you have something important to share. Remind yourself of that.
Mhm.
You have an expertise
Yep.
that somebody needs to hear. So
So
that
true.
also seems to help.
So true. And knowing that people like to hear, they can even hear similar things from different people and feel different ways about it, right? So, one thing I mentioned when we were talking about how to find shows is I'm like, hey, let's say one of your competitors was on a show, let's say a year ago or something like that. And you're like, hey, they were already on it, so I can't pitch that show. No, no. You can absolutely be pitching that show. I wouldn't pitch them if it was like they were just on it like a month ago. You know what I mean? But if it was something like a year ago, maybe even 9 months ago, something like that, what I would actually do and what we do is point that out. When you're pitching, just say, hey, I know you had so and so on to talk about podcast guesting, for instance. I loved what you guys had to say about XYZ. Now, what I would love to do is come on and take your audience to the next level, right? There are people are going to hear from that person, and they're also going to hear from you, or they're only going to hear from one or the other. But people really relate to certain people more than they relate to others, right? And I know that with my introverts who are big connectors, who are deep thinkers, like you were saying, there are going to be some people that are going to naturally align with that more than maybe someone that is a more natural extrovert, and vice versa, right? So don't ever think that, again, just because someone was already on a show or someone's already talked about a certain thing on a show, that you don't have an opportunity there, because people, again, will gravitate towards who they kind of naturally gravitate towards.
Yeah. Okay, so you've gotten over your fear, you're on the show. What's some advice for people to learn to connect and engage with the audience on the podcast?
Always stories. So always think about what stories you want to be telling. And I'm not talking like give us your life history or, tell us a 10-minute story or anything like that. But I do think it's great to have client examples, for instance, case study examples. Those are really the things that people love to hear. And those are the things that they really remember. I was just on a podcast last week and we were talking about the power of vulnerability, right? On podcasts and being really authentic and having these real conversations, right? And I was able to give examples of a couple different clients and literally what we've seen when they've opened up and been more vulnerable and what that's looked like in their life, in their business, etc. That is the type of stuff that people really remember. They remember the stories. They remember either the things that happened in your life or when you're telling a client story, etc. They really, really relate to that. So I would kind of have almost like a story bank. I've heard that term before, which I think is good, so that you are prepared with kind of those different examples there.
Yeah. Yeah, we're built on stories, human beings.
Yep.
That's what we learn from. And I mean, people can talk about theory and it's not going to relate as much as if you have some examples of how you've
Mm-hmm.
applied that theory.
Exactly.
And yeah, I think that's a good idea. I know in my preparation as an introvert, I'm not ever gonna script something like, podcast or a public speech, but I am gonna think ahead of time. Okay, who's
Mm-hmm.
my audience? What's some good stories that I have
Mm-hmm.
that I want to share? And
Mm-hmm.
just as I'm preparing, I let that roll around in my head, in advance of the podcast or speech. And
Mm-hmm.
I just those kinds of stories come to me, and I need to capture that and think, yeah, this is a good story for this particular thing.
Absolutely. I mean, just to give an example of yesterday when I started to prepare for this podcast, that's exactly what I did. I started thinking about what are some of my introverted clients, like what does that kind of look like for them, and what are the things that they've told me about doing this work, right? So that I am prepared as much as possible, with those examples. Again, I didn't write stuff down. I didn't like do anything like that, but just having it in my head of like knowing I've already thought about this a little bit so that I am prepared for if and when those questions come.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe some people don't need to write stuff down, but if you do, write it down.
That's
You
fine.
know?
I mean, I write stuff down all day, so
Yeah,
don't
right,
don't
right,
get me
right.
wrong, you guys.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
in that instance, I was ready with like what those examples would be. But you got to do what works for you, right? I mean, you got to do what makes the most sense for you.
So related to podcast guesting, there might also be opportunities for speaking or
Mhm.
media appearances. How does all this that we're talking about apply to that?
I mean, I think that the more podcast guesting is a great place to start for doing more public speaking and these other types of opportunities. And kind of the reason we've said is like getting that muscle of being really comfortable talking about your message, talking about these other things in front of other people, right? So even if you're having a one-on-one conversation in a podcast setting or recording, that's still going out to a lot of people, right? Other people are going to be listening in on that conversation whenever it airs, right? So it's getting you kind of mentally ready for the knowledge of like other people have now heard me, right? This isn't like no one's ever heard me before or heard me speak or anything like that. but getting ready for those public speaking opportunities. And one thing that I am a big, big fan of, because we do public speaking pitching for some of our clients as well, is I love showing up where people have opted in to hear from me. Okay. And I think that this is something that really resonates like across, especially entrepreneurs, right? Where someone is literally hitting play on a podcast episode to hear me, right? Someone is going to an event and they're going to hear me at that event. What I mean by that is it's not just them scrolling socials and just hearing my voice, right? Or happening to stumble across something. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way, but I just mean that like that means these audiences are bought in, right? They are wanting to hear what it is that we are saying or we are going to talk about, etc. And having done the podcast work is going to prepare you even further for those stages, that public speaking work, etc., and to feel more comfortable. We actually have a client of ours, Christina Lynn, who's an amazing bookkeeper. And she was telling me when we work with our clients over a year, we get them booked on 24 podcasts over a year. Okay. And so that's a lot of podcasts to have been on over a year and get really comfortable. You definitely feel different, or she felt very different from episode 1 and 2 to episode, 24, right? Feeling much more comfortable in what she's saying, etc. But she was telling me how she then was just like at a local networking event or something like that. And they unexpectedly called her up to the stage to introduce herself, right? But she was like, I was ready. Like, I was ready to go. I wasn't stressed. I wasn't anything. Like, I've been on all these podcasts. I feel extremely comfortable now talking about what it is I do, who I do it for, etc. So even just that repetition had made it so that when that kind of public speaking opportunity, even though it was a little unexpected, came up, she was ready and prepared to do that.
Yeah. And back on the introvert extrovert differences, we talked about preparation, and it's the same for public speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And as I get to know you better, we do differ in the way that we might prepare. And
Mm-hmm.
I just need to understand that's fine. That's good.
Yeah.
I can't be jealous that Christina is able to be more spontaneous than me. I just
Mm-hmm.
have to figure out what do I need to do and
Exactly.
not compare myself to other people.
Not compare yourself, because I mean, what is that saying? Comparison is a thief of joy. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
We are who we are. And now it's also just figuring out how do we make the best of those skills that we all have, those strengths that we have, and what's going to work for us.
And the other thing I don't think we talked about, but the other difference is I need to figure out how to manage my energy. Like, maybe
Mm,
I'm enjoying giving a speech because I do. I
yeah.
love it, but it might be draining to me even if I enjoyed it, and I might need a break afterward, and I just might need to plan that in. I often talk
Yeah.
about with the podcast, I am loving this conversation with you, but I have an hour after where I'm not doing
I
anything.
love that. I love that. I love that. Whereas I'm like, okay, as soon as this is done, go get your coffee because you got to finish a meal. Do. You know what I mean? Because this will actually energize me, right? Like having a conversation with someone, because usually I'm just sitting at home by myself, right? I'm kind of doing my thing. But this will be really good. But on the flip side of that, I am that way after events. So like I was just that's like a lot of extroverted, like that's a lot because my energy is so high during events and it like is nonstop. I was just at one of the podcast movement events in Chicago last week. And the day after I got back home, I will try to build in a day actually after an event at the location where I can just decompress, like literally just like watch TV, get room service, and like not do anything because I need that decompression time. Because the second I get back home, I'm right back into, being a wife and a mother and being a business owner and XYZ, right? So I am so with you. Like knowing what you need for that decompression time is so important as well. Whatever that looks like, whether it's to your point, building an hour in after a podcast interview, or for me, it's like building a day in after I go to an event, whatever that looks like, but knowing that like it's okay to have that kind of rest time to get back up to, it's like that pull back to fly forward or whatever that stuff is. You kind of know that you need that, to manage your energy.
Yeah. And then is finding opportunities for public speaking different than finding a podcast?
Yes, they are different. The public speaking opportunities, they're a lot more limited, right? In the sense that with podcasts, well, it's actually when I was at the event I was at last week, I learned that there's, I want to say like 700,000 active podcasts. Okay. Like on Apple Podcasts or something like that. Everyone always likes to throw these stats out of there's millions and millions of podcasts. There are millions of podcasts, but a lot of them are inactive. Okay. So let's say there's about 750K that are active. That's still a huge amount of opportunities. Of course, that's across all different kinds of genres, that's across all different kinds of things. But the point of that being, even if whatever you're doing, there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands of shows, right? In whatever particular niche that you're doing. So you get a no from shows, which by the way, you will get a no from shows. Okay. So be prepared. No, just know that that's going to happen. Whereas with public speaking opportunities, there's not 750,000 speaking opportunities, right? So it just is a bit more limited. It also is something where you do have the opportunity to be getting paid. So with podcasts, you're not going to get paid to be a guest on a podcast, at least not really that we've ever dealt with or anything like that. And you're certainly never going to pay to be a guest on a podcast. I will go off on that if you give me the opportunity, David, but I will tell you right now, that is not what's happening. Okay.
Right, right.
So with like when we're pitching our clients to public speaking opportunities, we are trying to find opportunities. This doesn't always happen, but where there is a payment involved, right? You are getting paid for your time because people are paying to be a part of that event, right? Whereas with podcasts, there's no money being exchanged. Like y'all that are listening to this podcast didn't pay to listen to this podcast, right? So it just means that there's kind of a different level of application involved typically there. We're having to submit maybe even outlines, maybe even slides, kind of a different level of stuff than we are when we're pitching our clients to podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely.
But to be clear though, there is still a lot of great opportunity in public speaking. And I mean, when you talk about like getting in great leads to your business, I do still believe that speaking on stages is one of the highest converters for that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow, we've had a great conversation. Time's gone by fast. Is there anything else you want to add today, Christina?
I think the one thing I'd love to add is just you can do this. I know that there's going to be people listening, and this happens on every podcast I'm in where they are like, this sounds great. I'm never going to do that. Right. Like they're like, that is just, I can't ever imagine doing this, et cetera. And we've talked about it a bit, but it is really just a matter of getting started. The question that I really like to ask people is, what do you think is the worst thing that's going to happen? Like, what do you think is the worst thing that's going to happen from putting yourself out there and doing this? And for a lot of people, they say the wrong thing, right? They stumble over their words. People think that they don't know what they're talking about, right, et cetera. We've kind of already busted those myths a bit during this episode, but I am here to tell you that I truly believe the worst thing that can happen is you don't put yourself out there and out in front of new audiences because our businesses will not grow. If we are not getting in front of new audiences regularly, we're not seeing that growth. No stages equals no growth. That's a big saying that we have at our company. You got to be getting out there. And podcasts are stages. I consider podcasts a stage as well, right? A platform for you to get on. So please know that this is something you can do. You can do it yourself. You can hire someone to do it for you. There's all kinds of different ways to do it. But so many business owners and entrepreneurs sleep on publicity and getting out in front of their audience through leveraged ways. And so I want to make sure that no one listening today falls into that same trap and you're getting out there and doing the damn thing.
That's right. That's right. So, of course, how can people find out more about you and the great work you do?
Yes, I would love to have folks go to publicitybychristina.com/booked. And I thought I was being really clever. And so it's publicityxchristina.com. When I first started my business, I was like, oh, look at you, like South by Southwest, like so trendy. And now it's the bane of my existence, but that is what it is. So publicitybychristina.com/booked. I have a free download there. You can connect with me in different ways there. You can also find me on Instagram at publicityxchristina. And I'm always chatting about my adventure and my business and all that type of stuff over there.
All right. Well, thanks again, Christina. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, David. I really, really appreciate it. And I've loved the conversation and getting the opposing viewpoints. It's awesome.
Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you. I hope you take the time to explore other episodes and learn from other amazing guests. Remember, If you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there is now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the four-letter Myers-Briggs code. I'll add a link in the show notes. And I'd love to connect with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the quietandstrong.com website, which includes blog posts and links to social media for Quiet and Strong and much more. Send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. So many great things about being an introvert, and so we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.